All right, so are you ready to delve into one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries in American history?
Oh, absolutely.
The Zodiac Killer.
Yeah.
Cryptic messages, terrifying crimes, and a shadowy figure that has haunted California and really the world for decades.
You know what's so captivating about this case is that even with all the information out there, the Zodiac's true identity remains a complete enigma.
And we're going to try to unravel at least some of it today, right? You brought excerpts from the Spanish Wikipedia entry, Asesino del Zodiaco.
I did, yes. It's interesting how this case has resonated internationally.
Oh, yeah.
The source material we have here details the confirmed victims, possible victims, the chilling timeline, and it even dives into some of the most prevalent theories. Are you ready to take a deep dive into the darkness?
Absolutely. Let's start with the facts, the confirmed victims. Where does this twisted tale begin?
Well, our journey starts on a December night in 1968 on Lake Herman Road. A young couple, David Arthur Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were on a first date when their lives were brutally cut short, shot in cold blood. Their murders marked the beginning of the Zodiac's reign of terror.
It's hard to imagine the fear that must have gripped the community after such a senseless act. Did the Zodiac strike again?
He did. Just 6 months later, in July of '69, the Zodiac attacked again. This time, at the Blue Rock Springs parking lot, another couple, Michael Mageau and Darlene Farron, were targeted.
Okay.
Darlene tragically lost her life, but Michael miraculously survived. His account of that terrifying night gave investigators their first real glimpse into the Zodiac's methods, his modus operandi.
For those unfamiliar with the term modus operandi, it basically refers to the characteristic way a criminal commits a crime. So was there a pattern emerging? Were these attacks becoming more brazen?
Absolutely. Just 2 months later, in September of '69, the Zodiac attacked again. This time, he targeted Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard at Lake Berryessa. This is where things take an even darker turn. The Zodiac, wearing a hooded costume with a chilling symbol, a circle with a cross through it, bound and stabbed the couple repeatedly.
Right.
Cecilia, unfortunately, succumbed to her injuries.
That symbol became almost synonymous with the Zodiac. It was like his calling card, a way to taunt the police and the public.
Exactly. And to add to the horror, he made a phone call to the police shortly after the attack, describing his heinous act in a chillingly calm voice.
A chilling phone call. This is like something straight out of a horror movie. Were there any more attacks?
Yeah. His final confirmed murder took place in October of '69. This time, he took the life of Paul Stein, a San Francisco taxi driver, shooting him at point-blank range in the Presidio Heights neighborhood.
Wow.
And here's where it gets really unsettling. Witnesses actually saw the Zodiac fleeing the scene, and a police patrol car even drove right past him.
So close yet so far away. What happened? Why wasn't he caught?
It was a case of miscommunication.
Uh-oh.
The witnesses described the suspect, but there was a discrepancy in their accounts of his race, leading the police to search for someone who didn't match the Zodiac's description, a missed opportunity that allowed him to vanish once again.
It's frustrating to say the least that such a seemingly simple miscommunication could have such dire consequences. But you mentioned that the Zodiac claimed even more victims.
Yeah, his letters, which were riddled with ciphers, by the way, those are coded messages, contained a horrifying claim that he was responsible for 37 murders. However, investigators have only definitively connected him to 7 victims.
Right.
This discrepancy leaves us with a deeply unsettling question. Could there be more victims out there, lost to time? Their stories buried with the Zodiac's secrets.
That's a horrifying thought. So who are some of these potential victims? What makes their cases stand out as possible Zodiac killings?
Well, one particularly eerie case is that of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, a couple who were murdered on a beach near Lompoc in 1963. Their deaths bear chilling similarities to the Lake Herman Road murders. The brutality of the crime, the secluded location, it all aligns with the Zodiac's later MO. However, there's one glaring difference: the lack of the Zodiac's signature communication.
Right. No letters, no ciphers, no taunting phone calls. That seems completely out of character for the Zodiac. He seemed to crave the attention, the notoriety.
Exactly, and that's what makes this case and several others so perplexing. Were these early murders merely practice runs committed before he developed his twisted brand? Or was he involved in some way but deliberately chose to remain silent? A ghost in the shadows.
A ghost in the shadows. That's an unsettling thought. Are we other cases that fit this pattern? Crimes that might be linked to the Zodiac but lack his signature communication?
There are a few, but perhaps the most intriguing is the case of Jerry Jo Bates. She was murdered in 1966 at Riverside City College, years before the Zodiac officially emerged. But there are elements of her case that whisper of his presence.
What kind of elements are we talking about? What makes her murder stand out from other unsolved cases at the time?
The brutality of the attack, for one, but even more compelling are the letters and poems sent to the police and media following her death. Some investigators believe these writings bear a striking resemblance to the Zodiac's later communications, both in style and content.
So are we talking about ciphers? Threats, the same kind of cryptic messages he became known for?
Not exactly. While some of the language echoes the Zodiac's later writings, there were no ciphers in these early communications. But the tone, the macabre fascination with death, it's undeniably similar.
It's almost like we're catching glimpses of a monster in the raping, witnessing the evolution of his dark persona. Are there any other details about the Bates case that suggest a Zodiac connection?
There's one detail that's particularly chilling. A handwritten poem titled The Confession was found carved into a desk at the college library. The handwriting was analyzed and compared to the Zodiac's known writing samples. The results, inconclusive. Some experts saw similarities, others dismissed them as coincidental.
It's like trying to catch smoke. Just when you think you have a grasp on it, it slips through your fingers. Are there any other potential victims whose stories might shed light on this shadowy period before the Zodiac officially emerged?
Well, you mentioned Donna Lass earlier, a young woman who vanished from South Lake Tahoe in 1970. Her disappearance, while never officially linked to the Zodiac, is shrouded in a similar veil of mystery and eerie coincidence.
Right, she vanished without a trace, hundreds of miles away from the Zodiac's known hunting grounds. But didn't he send a postcard that seemed to reference her disappearance?
He did. Months after Lass vanished, a postcard arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle, a collage of images and letters that some interpreted as a claim on her as a victim. It even mentioned Sierra Club in Victim 12, a chilling echo of the Zodiac's previous boasts.
But the Zodiac's confirmed victim count was off, wasn't it? That always seemed like a strange inconsistency, a detail that didn't quite fit his usual pattern.
It did, and for decades it was just another piece of this maddening puzzle. But then, in 2023, a startling discovery sent shockwaves through the true crime community. A skull found near Donner Pass was identified through DNA as belonging to Donna Lass.
It's like a ghost from the past suddenly materialized. But does this new development definitively prove that the Zodiac was involved in her disappearance?
It doesn't offer concrete proof, no. The circumstances of her death remain a mystery. However, the timing, the location, and that chilling postcard sent to the Chronicle, they weave a web of eerie connections that are hard to ignore.
Okay, so we've got these potential victims, these unsettling echoes of the Zodiac's presence, but no confirmed link. It's enough to make you question everything we thought we knew about his timeline, his motives, even his geographical boundaries.
Precisely, and this uncertainty, this ambiguity, is what makes the Zodiac case so captivating. It's a labyrinth of clues and dead ends, a puzzle that refuses to be solved.
And speaking of dead ends, let's talk about the near miss after the Paulstein murder. The police were so close to catching him. What went wrong? How did he slip through their grasp?
It was a tragic case of miscommunication compounded by the limitations of technology at the time. The witnesses provided a description, but there was a discrepancy about the suspect's race. This crucial detail was relayed incorrectly, leading the police to search for someone who didn't match the Zodiac's appearance.
So a simple misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of information, allowed a cold-blooded killer to escape justice. It's almost too much to bear.
It highlights the fragility of justice, the way even the smallest misstep can have monumental consequences. And it raises a chilling question: what if that miscommunication never happened? Would the Zodiac's reign of terror have ended that night? Would we even be having this conversation today?
It's impossible to know for sure, but what we can say is that this case, in many ways, became a catalyst for change. The mistakes made, the lessons learned, they ultimately led to advancements in police communication, forensic techniques, and investigative protocols.
Absolutely. The Zodiac case, for all its darkness, pushed law enforcement to evolve, to adopt new technologies, to rethink their approach to investigating these kinds of complex, multifaceted crimes.
It's a bittersweet realization that from the ashes of tragedy, progress often emerges. But before we get too lost in the philosophical implications, let's get back to the suspects. We talked about Arthur Lee Allen, the prime suspect, who ultimately couldn't be definitively linked to the crimes. Were there other individuals who seemed promising, who seemed to fit the profile of this shadowy killer?
There were several, each with their own intriguing set of circumstances and potential connections to the Zodiac. One such individual was Richard Gaikowski, a newspaper editor who caught the attention of investigators due to his physical appearance and a chilling connection to a police dispatcher.
Right, didn't a police dispatcher claim that his voice was a match to the Zodiac's, the same voice that had talked at her over the phone?
Yes, Nancy Slover, the dispatcher who had spoken to the Zodiac on several occasions, claimed that Gaikowski's voice sounded eerily familiar. It was a tantalizing lead, a potential breakthrough, in a case riddled with dead ends.
So what happened? Why didn't this lead to an arrest? Was there any concrete evidence to connect Gaikowski to the crimes?
Unfortunately, no. While the voice identification was compelling, it wasn't enough to build a solid case against Gaikowski. There was no physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints linking him to any of the crime scenes. And ultimately, the investigation into Gaikowski, like so many others, faded into the shadows of uncertainty.
It's like chasing a phantom, grasping at clues that dissolve upon closer inspection. It's enough to make you wonder if the Zodiac was deliberately misleading investigators, leaving behind a trail of false leads to further taunt and confuse them.
That's certainly a possibility. He seems to relish the attention, the cat-and-mouse game he was playing with law enforcement. And he was undoubtedly intelligent, cutting enough to manipulate the narrative, to control the flow of information, to keep himself one step ahead of those trying to unmask him.
And that brings us to one of the most intriguing and perhaps unsettling theories surrounding the Zodiac: the occult theory.
The theory suggests that the Zodiac's crimes weren't merely the acts of a deranged individual, but rather a part of a larger, more sinister plan, possibly rooted in occult practices and rituals.
That's some seriously dark stuff. Was there any evidence to support this theory, or is it purely speculation?
It's largely based on interpretations of the Zodiac's symbols and writings. Some researchers believe they contain hidden messages or references to specific occult practices, but these interpretations are highly subjective, open to a wide range of readings and interpretations.
So we're talking about reading between the lines, looking for patterns and connections that might not even exist. It's like trying to decipher a dream full of symbolism and ambiguity.
Precisely. And that's part of what makes this case so captivating, so frustratingly elusive. There's always another layer to peel back, another rabbit hole to explore.
Right. And one of those rabbit holes leads to Michael O'Hare, a university professor who became a person of interest for those who subscribe to the occult theory.
O'Hare had connections to Berkeley, a hotbed of counterculture and alternative belief systems in the 1960s. Some researchers believe he might have been involved in groups that dabbled in the occult, making him a potential fit for the Zodiac's alleged ritualistic motives.
It's like something out of a horror novel. Secret societies, ancient rituals, a killer driven by dark forces beyond our comprehension. But were there any concrete links between O'Hare and the Zodiac, or was it all just speculation and circumstantial connections?
Unfortunately, the link between O'Hare and the Zodiac remained purely theoretical. There was no physical evidence, no eyewitness accounts, no concrete proof to connect him to the crimes. And ultimately, he faded into the background noise of this complex and confounding case.
So many potential suspects, so many tantalizing leads, but no definitive answers. It's enough to drive you mad.
And perhaps that was part of the Zodiac's goal: to create chaos, to sow confusion, to leave a trail of unanswered questions that would haunt investigators and the public alike for decades to come.
Speaking of haunting, there's one detail about the Zodiac that I always found particularly chilling: his threat to blow up a school bus full of children.
Yes, that was a particularly disturbing element of his communications. In a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, he described in detail how he planned to rig a school bus in explosives, creating a horrific spectacle of death and destruction.
It's almost unimaginable, the level of depravity and disregard for human life that such a threat implies. But thankfully, it never came to pass.
Thankfully, no. It's impossible to know for sure whether he was serious or merely engaging in a twisted form of psychological warfare, but it certainly added to the atmosphere of fear and paranoia that surrounded the case.
It's like he was trying to create a living nightmare, to instill a sense of dread that would permeate every aspect of daily life. And in many ways, he succeeded.
He did. The Zodiac became a boogeyman, a symbol of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of society. And even though his reign of terror eventually ended, his shadow lingers, reminding us that evil can take many forms. And sometimes, the monsters we fear the most are the ones we never fully see.
But amidst all the darkness, there are those glimmers of hope, those moments of unexpected humor that somehow manage to break through the gloom.
Oh, do tell.
The Zodiac's obsession with the Mikado, a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, it just seems so incongruous, so out of place, considering the gravity of his crimes.
It is rather amusing, isn't it? This bizarre juxtaposition of the lighthearted and the macabre. He quoted from it in his letters, even threatened to attack based on themes from the play.
It's almost like he was trying to humanize himself, to show that he had a sense of humor, albeit a very twisted one. Or perhaps he was drawn to the themes of justice and punishment that are so prevalent in the Mikado.
Perhaps. Or maybe it was just another way to taunt and confuse those trying to understand him. After all, the Zodiac was a master manipulator, a puppeteer who delighted in pulling the strings of fear and uncertainty.
Okay, so we've covered the confirmed victims, the potential victims, the chilling timeline, the suspects, the theories. It's been a wild ride. But as we wrap up our deep dive into the Zodiac case, I'm left with one overwhelming question. Will we ever truly know who he was, what motivated him, why he did what he did?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The Zodiac case is like a puzzle with missing pieces, a story within a clear ending. We may never have definitive answers, but that doesn't mean we should stop searching. New evidence could emerge, new technologies could be applied, new perspectives could shed light on old mysteries.
And who knows, maybe someday those missing pieces will fall into place and the true face of the Zodiac will finally be revealed.
Until then, the mystery endures.
And that's the power of a good mystery, isn't it? Keeps us guessing, keeps us thinking, keeps us engaged, even after all these years. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Zodiac case.
For now, at least. But something tells me this conversation is far from over.